And a big hello and welcome to the third in the three-part Silver webinar series aiming to support schools to continue to develop a whole school approach to identifying and supporting young carers. My name is Jess Hill and I'm the Schools Policy and Development Officer at Carers Trust. Videos of our first and second webinars can be found on our website, youngcarersinschools.com. And just to say that this series follows on from our initial three-part webinar series, focusing on the initial steps schools can take to identify and support young carers, which will run in the autumn term and are also available on our website, youngcarersinschools.com. And all of these webinars are part of a series of steps schools can take to adopt a whole schools approach to identifying and supporting young carers. There are many reasons why a whole school approach is vital to identifying young carers and improving their attainment, attendance and well-being at school. We have touched on several of these reasons in previous webinars, including how a whole school ethos can help ensure young carers and their families feel safe and confident to access support, the importance of all school staff being aware of the potential signs that a pupil or student may be a young carer in light of evidence that shows that many of them are hidden, and the types of flexibilities that young carers may need to be able to enjoy and achieve at school, which means that all school staff need to know what key actions they can take as part of their own job roles to raise outcomes for this vulnerable pupil group. It's also important that all staff are aware of the school's process for sharing information about a young carer, and this will help to ensure that information is only shared with the appropriate consent and with the view to guaranteeing that a pupil does not have to repeat their story several times. And all staff should know not to discuss a pupil's caring role in front of their peers. So what does this webinar aim to achieve? Well, this webinar focuses on the developing steps schools can take to increase rates of identification and increase attendance, attainment and well-being for young carers through the use of some key existing school systems, using young carers, other staff, links with feeder schools and agencies to increase the impact of your provision, and help embed a whole school ethos across the school and ensure sustainability. In doing so, it aims to discuss the rationale for implementing these core components in your school, explore what they look like in practice, enable you to identify the extent to which your school may already have these things in place, and provide key information and key actions to make it as easy as possible for you to fill in any gaps. So once you have the foundation stones to identifying and supporting young carers in place, which were outlined in our webinar series run in the autumn, the next steps to embedding young carers into your school systems will be looking at ensuring school policy reflects the needs of young carers, using enrolment and transition processes to ensure early identification and continuity of provision, and embedding young carers in existing processes for monitoring the progress of individual pupils and the impact of the school's provision on pupil groups. Each of these elements will be unpicked during today's webinar, and in doing so, we will cover elements of standards 1, 3, 4 and 5 of the Silver Level Award criteria. It is vital that schools acknowledge young carers in their principal school documents and proactively communicate these to pupils, families and staff. Doing so will support the creation of a whole school ethos where young carers and their families are respected and valued, which in turn will help them to feel more safe and confident to access support. It will also provide clarity about the roles and responsibilities of school staff in relation to young carers and the type of support available to pupils and their families. One of the initial steps in your young carer provision is to have a whole school commitment to young carers in place. This should capture the value the school places on meeting young carers, summarises the school's approach to supporting this vulnerable pupil group, and reflects safeguarding requirements. I go into more detail about the whole school commitment in our autumn webinars, which again you can find on our website. To meet young carers' needs more effectively and to develop your young carer provision, it is important to have a school policy in place for young carers alongside your school commitment. This policy will be able to specify in greater detail how the school will identify and address young carers' needs. Developing a school policy, in addition to a whole school commitment to young carers, will provide greater clarity about the roles and responsibilities of school staff in relation to young carers, the types of support available to pupils and their families in school, and the ways in which the school works with other organisations, including the local young carers service, school nurse, and emotional wellbeing support in relation to young carers. So what form can it take? Well, your policy can either take the form of a new, standalone policy developed specifically for young carers, or in the revision of an existing policy to include young carers, such as your school inclusion or a bullying policy. Developing a new young carer policy will help to raise the profile of young carers in your school. It will also help to give them and the work you and your school are doing status and highlights the importance of young carer provision and the need for a whole school approach. However, having a young carer policy included within a wider school policy can also be beneficial, as it's incorporating into something which has already been established and what staff are already familiar with. Whether you decide to include your young carer policy within an existing policy or as a newly developed one, it is important that these updates or the new policy are shared with staff, so letting them know it's been updated, how to access it and where to find it. And it's important also that it's promoted to pupils and their families. This could be done easily via the school website, in the school prospectus, or signposted to from your school's pupil notice board. It's important also to have a policy review date in place so that you can monitor the effectiveness of the policy and be able to amend accordingly. It's also really important that your policy is signed off by school governors. This helps to develop the whole school approach, as well as helping to ensure continuity, so that policy still remains in place and in force even if the operational lead or staff responsible for young carers leaves or changes their job role. So some key actions here for putting a policy into place is to have already in place your whole school commitment for young carers. Use your whole school commitment as a basis to develop your policy for young carers. Consider what form you want your policy to take, so whether as a new policy or one incorporated into one that already exists, and make sure you put a review date into place. The specific information that you will need to capture in your young carer policy will depend on the extent of your school's wider provision for young carers. When developing your young carer provision and moving towards the silver level of the award, recommended points to include in your policy are the definition of a young carer and the types of things they may do, putting in who is responsible for young carers, so both the operational lead and the SLT lead, and how staff and families can contact them, showing that the school understands the needs of young carers and what flexibilities they may need, i.e. access to a telephone during break or lunchtime, showing what additional support is available, that the support is advertised on pupil notice boards and on the school website and in the prospectus, sharing what targeted interventions are available to pupils who have caring roles, so perhaps this is emotional support, health support or homework or coursework support, share an outline of staff training and professional development of staff, which relates to young carers, share what other agencies your school works with, so this could be your local young carers service, housing teams, emotional support, and again sharing how this is advertised within your school. How the curriculum or assemblies are used to promote a full understanding of the issues young carers face, how your school uses enrolment and transition processes to check pupil information and ask the relevant questions to families, and also sharing how young carers are flagged on internal management systems. It seems like a lot, but it's about breaking them down and rewording them in a way that's most beneficial to your school, and looking at, again, what are those things that you have in place and what you'd like to share. So some key actions are to consider our recommended points and see what information you want to capture for your school. So the things we have set out to include in your school policy for young carers are drawn together from learning from extensive consultation with young carers, school staff and young carer services. To support you with developing your young carer policy and to help make this as easy as possible, you can find a policy checklist in step 5 of the step-by-step guide. Although we have used extensive England-wide consultation to shape the policy checklist, to best meet the needs of young carers in your school, it's also important to gather and incorporate the views of young carers that you're working with when developing your school policy. Doing so will help to flesh out your policy and will help you to ensure that young carer provision meets the needs of young carers in your school. So, for example, one of our award-winning schools set up a quiet room where young carers could go if they needed to, if they needed some time out, because that's what they wanted, that's what they said they wanted. Help you to ensure that young carers feel respected and valued and foster a feeling of trust. Help you to raise the profile of young carers in school. And young carers can also play a role in creating family-friendly or young people versions of the policy by helping to put it into their own language. So when encouraging young carers to participate in your consultation and to gather their views effectively, you can explain how important their opinions and views are, and that without them, issues for young carers will not be resolved in the best way possible. You can follow through with ideas from young carers so they can see that their views are being taken on board. You can ensure opportunities for young carers to provide their views are organised at a suitable time. So it's important to remember that some young carers may find it difficult to attend things that are held after school. You provide young carers with feedback so they know they can see how their ideas have been taken on board and that they're being listened to. And where possible, offer a variety of methods of how they can get involved in providing their thoughts. So there's something for every young carer in your school. There are different ways you can involve young carers and encourage them to participate in consultation. One of these ways is through questionnaires or surveys. These are relatively easy to administer and can work well when measuring the quantitative impact the school has had, but they do have several restrictions. Some of which are, some pupils may not feel encouraged to provide accurate, honest answers. Pupils may not feel comfortable providing answers that present themselves in an unfavourable manner. Pupils may not be fully aware of their reasons for any given answer, which can be better explored through a discussion. Some pupils may not understand certain questions asked or know how best to respond to a certain question in a questionnaire or in a survey, which may result in the true views not being gathered. And it can also be really quite difficult to ensure that all questionnaires or surveys are returned. So a more effective way to gather young carers' views is through conversation. This allows for a young person to express themselves, ask questions directly, and can feel really listened to when there is a member of staff or their peer listening proactively to them. Some effective ways you can gather young carers' views through conversation are by holding a one-off session or a focus group. So these are best used when there is a particular issue which needs to be addressed and for when young carer involvement is needed. So holding these sessions to help shape your young carer policy are beneficial because a group discussion can be facilitated and different ideas can be suggested and the positive and negatives can also be debated. Or you could hold one-to-one sessions. So these sessions are a chance for young carers to talk with you or other members of staff individually, away from other pupils and other young carers. Some young carers may not feel confident or able to attend a focus group, so you can use this to ensure that all young carers have an opportunity to share their views. During these sessions, the operational lead will find it useful to ask, do you feel you get the information and support you need from school as a young carer? What would you like the school to do to raise awareness in a better way? What is the school doing well to support young carers? What would you like the school to do to support young carers better? And ask for any other comments they may have. So some key actions here again is to share with your young carers the importance of having their views heard and consider which methods would be best to use for your school to gather your young carer views, whether this is through questionnaires, surveys or through conversations. Another way to gather the views of the young carers in your school is to consider setting up a young carers forum. So a Young Carers Forum in your school brings together all or a representative sample of the young carers identified in your school on a regular basis to influence and develop the school's provision for pupils who have caring responsibilities. Not all young carers want to do this, so it's really important to find out from your young carers whether having a Young Carer Forum is something they would want to have in place and want to engage in. Setting up and running regular meetings of a Young Carers Forum creates opportunity for schools to gather young carers' input as you develop the school's provision. You could, for example, maximise the impact of your pupil notice board by gaining young carers' input on how to make the notice board engaging. You could even get your forum to design and produce new materials for you to help keep your notice board fresh and visually exciting. There's just a couple of key things to think about when setting up your Young Carers Forum. Thinking about when to run it. So it's important that the forum is held regularly enough to deal with any issues that come up, but not so regularly that there is nothing to discuss during the sessions. We suggest that once every half term might be a good place to start, and then you can adjust accordingly depending on how needed the meetings are. Other things to consider is adult involvement. So the forum should be run by members of staff who are recognised to young carers, are involved with young carers' issues within the school. Your first session should be about enabling young carers to get to know each other and to make sure that they feel comfortable about discussing important issues together. You may find that some young carers know each other already, while others might be newly identified and not know anyone else in the school who is a young carer. Icebreaker activities or a game can be a fun and effective way to get pupils talking to others outside of their friendship groups and to encourage all of them to participate. It's also important in this first session to set out the rules for your group, including how members of staff running the forum will undertake their role in the meetings. Ideas about the topics or activities the young carers may wish to discuss, along with a checklist and further information, can be found in Step 6, Tool 4 of the Step-by-Step Guide. Some key actions for setting up a Young Carers Forum is to consult with your young carers to see whether they would like to set up a Young Carers Forum, and use the guidance and tools available in the step-by-step guide to help support you in setting up and running this forum. Evidence suggests that as many as 1 in 12 pupils could be a young carer. To date in our webinar series, we have discussed the vital initial steps your school can take to increase rates of identification, including using notice boards, assemblies, staff training, and communications to parents and families to raise awareness about young carers and the support your school provides. To increase the effectiveness of your school's identification of young carers and tackle the multiple reasons why young carers often remain hidden, there are a variety of further incremental actions your school will also need to take. As a key next step is to embedding young carers in your school's transition procedures. This next step is vital as during transition points, young people can feel increased anxiety and will be thinking about the specific difficulties they may face during transition. For example, if a young carer has been taking their siblings with them to the same primary school that they were all attending, how might they be able to manage this now they are moving up to a secondary school? So what can your school do? There are a variety of things that schools can be doing to increase identification of young carers and to offer reassurance during times of enrolment and transition. These are listed on the slide and I will go through each of them in turn. First one is to include young carers on transition forms. So including them on the forms used to request information from feeder schools on transition from primary to secondary, as well as when a child transfers at other points. If you're a primary school, with the appropriate consent, include information relating to a pupil's caring role on transition forms, even if the secondary school hasn't asked for it. Doing so ensures that the correct information is passed on from school to school, and it also helps to raise the profile of young carers amongst schools who may not be currently young carer aware. Remember, you will need to have consent to share information that the pupil is a young carer and the additional agencies and services which may be involved. A key question to include would be, is the pupil a young carer? Please provide further details where possible. It is important to ensure information regarding the targeted interventions and services involved with pupils who are young carers are captured as part of wider questioning regarding interventions or provision, and where appropriate, a follow-up conversation may be necessary. You could also hold presentations at Year 6 open evenings, and doing so is an effective way of boosting identification of hidden young carers. So having a stand or a presentation at an open evening can help to increase awareness of young carers to a wider pool of pupils and their families. It could act as the first step in building a relationship with the family, enabling pupils and their families to see themselves that the school recognises and values young carers. And pupils may even choose a secondary school on the basis of the young carer provision available. As well as the questions asked during transition, it is also important that questions aimed to identify young carers is included in the information requested from families when a child joins the school. Key questions to include here are, is there anyone in your family or household who has a disability or a long-term illness? If so, would you like to know about the additional school support which is available to you and your child? Or something similar to, there's a variety of support on offer at our school. As your child is new to the school, it would help us greatly to know if there's anyone in your family who has a disability, special need, or a long-term illness. Please provide details below. These questions should be asked as some families may not know what young carers are and what to do if they think their child is a young carer, or they may be concerned that if they say their child is a young carer, it could escalate to social care and the family being split up. Reminding and reassuring pupils and their families that the school recognises and values young carers and that there's support available to them can help to ensure they feel more confident in accessing support. Just to note that we'll be holding a webinar in March looking at overcoming the barriers that families face in accessing support, so please keep an eye out for further details on the e-newsletter and on our website. It is important to remember that not all pupils with parents or other family members who are disabled, ill, or have alcohol or substance misuse issues will be a young carer. Therefore, once information has been received that there is a disability or an illness in the family, you should then have a follow-up conversation with pupils and or their family to establish the extent of a pupil's caring role and whether they require any support from school. So some key actions. Include young carers in your transition forms to help enable early identification of young carers. Include questions to gather information about potential young carers on your enrolment letters. And if a caring role has been identified through this, have follow-up conversations to see what specific support is needed. To effectively monitor the impact of your school's provision for young carers on individual outcomes, as well as on outcomes for young carers across the school, it is vital that your school has a system in place to monitor the attendance, attainment and progress of young carers and the interventions they are receiving. Ideally, this would be done by embedding young carers in your wider school systems, so i.e. by flagging young carers on your school's internal management systems. Embedding young carers in your existing systems will help ensure you implement a sustainable approach to monitoring. Depending on the provider of your school systems, flagging young carers on your school's internal management system may be relatively easy. Several systems already contain a young carers flag, which your school can start applying, or contain functionality for you to customize additional flags. However, we are aware that there are a number of internal management systems that do not currently contain the functionality for your school to flag young carers in the same way as other vulnerable pupil groups. If this is the case, we encourage you to contact the provider of your system requesting the creation of this functionality. Doing so will help you ensure you are able to create a sustainable and more manageable approach for monitoring the attainment and attendance of young carers, and if the provider creates this functionality for use by all users of their system, your request will also help raise the profile of young carers more widely across England, helping ensure that young carers are identified and supported regardless of the school they attend. In the absence of this functionality to flag young carers, it will be important for you to create an interim solution to tracking young carers' attendance, attainment and progress. So you could create a separate system, so i.e. creating a spreadsheet tracking the interventions, attendance, attainment, progress, as well as the punctuality and detentions data for young carers, which you can then update on a regular basis in line with the timing of your monitoring of other vulnerable pupil groups. Here on the screen you can see an example of submitted silver evidence which is provided by Heaston Primary School. This tracking document shows the support, interventions and activities provided through Pupil Premium and accessed by young carers. All young carers in this school are targeted with appropriate activities and interventions, which the tracking shows has been taken up by many. And this is a really clear and manageable way to ensure that young carers are not disadvantaged because of their caring role, as well as an effective way to measure the impact of support provided to those young carers by their school. And also on the screen is a screenshot of Sims, and down there you can see that young carer flag is in on that system. So some key actions here: find out whether it's possible for your internal management system to have a young carer flagging system, and if it's not possible or in the interim, create your own system to track the attainment, attendance and levels of young carers. Most schools will have systems in place, such as pupil progress meetings, bringing together a range of school staff to help regularly review the intervention and provision being delivered to those other key vulnerable groups. To ensure outcomes for young carers are monitored in a timely fashion, it is vital that your school includes young carers within your pupil progress meetings and that the discussion at these meetings is informed by your data monitoring and insights from direct engagement with pupils by school staff and external agencies. Key actions to embedding young carer provision is to include young carers as a specific group to be discussed at pupil progress meetings, and gather relevant information from external agencies prior to the meetings and consider whether it's appropriate for those other agencies to attend. Alongside these mechanisms, some schools have set up working groups to develop their young carer provision at silver and then onto gold level. There are a wide range of benefits to establishing an independent working group, looking specifically at the development of the school's young carer provision. This includes the ability to identify barriers to implementation and workarounds so that the development and implementation of your whole school approach to young carers is manageable and achievable. Create champions for your young carer provision at different parts of the school, who can then ensure key messages are passed on. Creating a working group is also a good way to ensure school staff will feel they had an opportunity to input ideas, raise concerns and identify any issues, which are all essential to ensure they are bought into the whole school approach and of keeping track of the progress of your school's developing provision. It may even provide the potential for you, as a school lead, to spread workload. Your working group will need to be a manageable size whilst big enough to include a sample of staff from across the school. We think having about 8 people would be about right. To ensure your working group delivers the benefits we have discussed and represents the views and experiences of the range of staff at your school, we suggest including a sample of teaching and non-teaching staff at both different levels from across the school. So, for example, support staff, teachers and a senior leader. We've had an award application through from a school that also had a clerk to governors on their working group, an ideal way to ensure governors are kept up to date and are brought into their responsibilities to ensure the school is meeting the needs of young carers. How often you and your group will meet will be down to you and your school, and it will of course be important to maintain a balance between being realistic and frequent enough to ensure things keep moving. We suggest starting with having meetings once every half term and see how this works for you and your group. Key actions here: consider whether setting up a working group is beneficial and manageable for your school. If so, include a range of staff from across the school and decide together how often you should meet. Depending on resources, Young Carer Services and other agencies may also be able to offer support to schools in the local community. This may include support to develop, implement and review the school's provision for young carers, therefore providing support to work through and obtain the Young Carers in Schools award, training and awareness raising amongst school staff, the delivery of assemblies on young carers, delivery or support with PSHE lessons, individual or group work with young carers, peer mentoring training, and lunchtime or after school groups. So your key action here is to find out what support the agencies in your local area can provide to schools. So, how do we evidence all of this for the award? Well, the key actions we have discussed during today's webinar are covered in elements of Standards 1, 3, 4 and 5 of the Silver Level Award criteria. To evidence for Standard 1 of Silver, you will need to provide us with an anonymous printout and/or report showing monitoring of young carers' attendance and attainment. This could be via your internal management system or another spreadsheet or system you have created to monitor this. We also ask for evidence of the young carer organisations in your local community. And also in the desirable there is just showing that you are accessing national support. So if you've attended any of our events across the country, this can count towards demonstrating you have accessed national external support, and so can the fact that you have attended today's webinar. For Standard 3, we ask that you share with us the anonymised copies of the transition forms you have used with feeder schools or that you have sent to secondary schools. We also ask that you share with us the anonymised forms used with parents or families to gather and maintain up-to-date pupil information at the start of the school year. Some schools have also shared with us how the support or intervention is carried out once a pupil has been identified. So on the screen you can see Hanwell Community School's pupil passport. For Standard 4, we ask that you share with us how you have gathered the views of the young carers in your school. So this could be by providing copies of the questionnaires or surveys with a brief overview of how they were used, or you could share with us minutes from a Young Carers Forum or a one-off session. And we also ask that you share with us copies of the policies that have been updated to reflect Young Carers' views, which also includes the review date. We hope that you've enjoyed this webinar series, and please keep an eye out for the future guest webinars taking place in March, which will be announced on our website. All of our webinars have been recorded and will be available along with the presentations and speaking notes on the Young Carers in Schools website. Thank you very much for joining me, and I hope you have a very pleasant afternoon. Thank you.